Hi everyone, here's what's bothering me today. I tried to get into the phone lines for CBC Cross Country Checkup because they were asking a very interesting question. Should body cams become more used around Canada by police forces? And I wanted to call in to say that's really only part of the solution. So Cross Country Checkup, here's what you missed out on. For starters, I want to address some comments that some of the earlier guests made. There's one person who said that cameras would help cops by basically being a way of proving, oh no, see, look, I totally did things this other way. This person is lying, which to a certain point, yes. But then again, most people knowing that in their interactions with cops, if they lie, it's not going to help them, aren't really going to do that. And secondly, with regards to that, qualified immunity laws, of which Canada has variants, exist, as does the thin blue line and its culture of coalescing around its own. The thin blue line mentality, as well as qualified immunity laws, are more than enough protection to prevent cops from, quote unquote, being victimized. The next one was a caller from a woman who said that cops are good. And I would really like her to ask minorities and Indigenous people how they feel about cops and their interactions with cops, because I think she will get a very different perspective. Now, in terms of the meat of the matter, as it were, you have the fact that body cams have already been used by various police forces and people are recording cops in the street here in Canada, and cops are still not really being held accountable. Case in point, the issue several months ago where we saw dash cam footage from the car of 3 RCMP officers absolutely brutalizing Indigenous Chief Alan Adam over a license tag. That right there should have shown people, well, maybe that's not quite enough. And then if that's too far back for you, there's the recent example from Barrie of cops in a very distressing video, absolutely brutalizing a young boy who was skateboarding in Barrie. One of the cops literally slams this kid's head into the sidewalk, potentially risking this kid becoming paraplegic or something. And you hear the woman recording screaming in horror because she realizes what she's seeing is not okay. And the police officer did it anyway, knowing he was being recorded, because then just a few moments later, he tells her to get back or he'll do the same to her. Yeah, sure, being recorded is really making cops hold themselves to a higher standard, which brings us to the nature of police accountability within the organization. Part of what, again, prevents that is the thin blue line concept. And additionally, as we've seen, cops will be more than happy to fire someone who's not a team player. Someone who's a rookie who tries to actually get other cops in trouble, they are often fired or they are ignored. Case in point, that poor Vancouver police officer who committed suicide after her reports of police misconduct and sexual assault against her by her coworkers went unpunished. Additionally, in terms of policing and police accountability, if they're in a situation where, cops are so stressed they can't really handle the job, then maybe we should, I don't know, lessen the stress and the burden on them by funding other services so that police don't need to be called for absolutely everything. And additionally, that's just really a call for greater mental health services, which we love to talk about and say that it's so important. Oh, look, Bell Canada, let's talk. And yet nothing concrete ever happens because at the end of the day, governments and people don't actually care that much. They just want to look like they care because that is what is socially acceptable, and they want to be socially acceptable. If we actually wanted to address police brutality and problems with police accountability, you would actually try and break up the culture and the mentality of the thin blue line. You can also look to Indigenous friendly and Indigenous-led police services here in Canada for alternative policing solutions. Everyone who's watching this or was tuning into Cross Country Checkup should absolutely check out the Kwanlin Dun First Nation Alternative Policing Program. They do work hand in hand with 2 RCMP constables, but it's basically 4 community safety officers who don't have guns, who are from the community and understand the culture and how the community operates and the people in the community. The result has been far less antagonism and instances of police brutality, and weirdly enough, the police responses have actually gone up in terms of their speed and efficacy because the RCMP constables knew that shit was real if they got called in. before, the RCMP were being called for like, oh, there's a bear in the front yard, or by the hockey rink or something. Like, okay, fine, we'll get there. Now they know that if one of these community safety officers calls them saying, hey, you need to get over here, they know it's probably a more serious issue. And yet there's instances in the community of not brutalizing people and not unnecessarily arresting people. It is obviously a good example. And a second example is here in Ontario, specifically in Northern Ontario. The Anishinaabe Police Service is responsible for policing an area, I think, bigger than Texas, like possibly twice the size of Texas. They do so with being chronically underfunded, and yet their record is among one of the best. Alternative policing methods and services are clearly illustrated by many people who advocate for this. Body cameras are only a part of this, and all this is ultimately rendered unnecessary if we actually funded communities properly in the first place. Most crime, what is it, in Vernon, BC, when they actually rolled out a basic income pilot, and I think it's still ongoing right now, petty crime dropped. That means less work and less stress for officers, and it ended up making communities safer and better to be a part of. When you fund communities by actually giving them access to schools and proper schools, you give them access to community associations, you give clean water, access to food, you give them halfway decent jobs and support local businesses. All this stuff is possible if we just fund communities. We understand in our culture and society that funding people is the best return on investment you can make. That's why public education exists. And yet still, there is a fight against actually providing this same understanding to all aspects of society that would then in turn help deal with police brutality, deal with crime and petty theft and all those sorts of things, help again, improve the economy by taking care of people's needs and making sure that they in turn go on and get better jobs, move up the socio-economic ladder. All these things are possible if we stop overly funding police with all this new gear that half the time they complain about and don't know how to use. And as we've seen with regards to training, that doesn't help. Derek Chauvin was a training officer. The lady who shot that man in a traffic stop where she apparently mistook her gun for a taser. She was also a training officer. So training is clearly not the issue here. The issue is the modern day institution of policing. And there are many alternate ways of keeping communities safe and healthy and well funded, and also reducing the stress and the burden on the police as they are today. And yet this never becomes part of the conversation, and no one talks about it, because at the end of the day, police here in this country and in America and in Britain and in Australia and everywhere you go, the only thing that the police are here to serve and protect are the interests of the ruling class in the state. And the fact that this isn't the conversation is definitely what's bothering me today.